Hello. When I've been looking into various development ideas that have happened in the history of the sport, and when I've watched other people's videos on it, like when F1 Fanatics hosted Jonty on their channel, one of the team names that always seems to come up is the Tyrrell team. Now, I appreciate there's probably a lot of younger people going, who the bloody hell are Tyrrell? Because the team was sold in 1998, and even for the several few years in the run up to that, when I remember them, it was always, are they going to have enough of a budget there next year to actually go racing? So, knowing that they are one of the biggest teams in the history of the sport, and that they've got a little bit lost in terms over time, I thought I would have a look into their history and do a video on it, because why not? So you'll be glad to know that this is probably the last you'll see of me for this video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of it. Bye bye. Ken Tyrrell was born on the 3rd of May 1924. In his early days didn't perhaps look like he had the making of someone who'd go on to be a massive force of nature in the sport of Grand Prix racing. He tried to take the 11 plus, didn't pass. Tried to get into technical college, didn't pass the entry exam. Tried to join the RAF and didn't pass the entry exam initially. However, not long after this, World War II broke out, and suddenly the RAF were more than happy to have him. So he served during the war as a flight engineer. Following the end of the war, Ken and his brother started a modestly successful timber business, and life was pretty steady. Then in 1951, Ken joined the local football team he played for on a day out to Silverstone, and it changed his life. Following in the footsteps of people like Enzo Ferrari, he did the decent thing and bought a racing car. He'd go on to race in F2 and got as far as testing for Aston Martin before losing the seat with the arrival at the team of Sterling Moss. And realising in 1958 that at 34 and still racing F2 he wasn't going to make it to the top flight, he turned his attention instead to management. In 1960 he formed the Tyrrell Racing Organisation, racing in Formula 3, based out of a shed at the old timber yard. In real terms, he ran the junior programme for Cooper Racing. Young drivers to first taste single-seater racing with Ken's team included John Surtees and Jackie Ickx. Most notably in the junior programme was a young Scot who turned up to test one day when Bruce McLaren had been running laps in the F3 car. McLaren was a little frustrated that this lad went out and beat his time, so he went out and went quicker still. The pair of them would trade fastest laps all day until finally the quickest time of the day went to the young Scot. And that was how Ken met Jackie Stewart. Success came for them in 1964 with Jackie securing the F3 title and winning the Monaco F3 race supporting the Formula One race. Jackie would then step into F1 with BRM soon after, and Ken would move the team into Formula 2. Formula One was calling Ken though, and after briefly running the works Cooper Formula One Team in 1965 after John Cooper was injured in an accident, he soon found himself in contact with the French manufacturer Matra, who also brought with them the French fuel company Elf. Lotus and Ford had brought the DSV engine to Formula One, and Ken worked on getting a supply of engines before entering the top level of motorsport in 1968. All he needed was a fast driver that he knew and trusted. Jackie at the time was in talks to join Ferrari. When Ken made him an offer, he chose to go with Ken because of Ken's reputation as an honest guy who could deliver. The partnership would deliver 3 wins in their first season together. In 1969, Jackie would go on to take the first of his 3 drivers' titles, taking the victory he needed at the Italian Grand Prix in one of the closest finishes in history. But 1970 would prove to be a trickier season. Tyrrell had split from Matra as the French company had wanted to use their own engines, which were inferior to the DSV engines that most of the grid were using at this point. Ken quickly found a supply of marked chassis for the team to use, but they proved to be not as competitive. The only way forward for the Tyrrell team was to produce their own chassis. Enter Derek Gardner to design the car. The Tyrrell 001 was built in the timber shed in the timber yard, and would finish the 1970 season looking fast but fragile. Its successor, the Tyrrell 003, in keeping with the built-in-the-shed philosophy, included several off-the-shelf parts, including an oil overspill collector from a Ford Transit van. It was still good enough, though, to collect 7 victories in total that season, 6 for Jackie and 1 for his new teammate, Francois Sever. Tyrrell, with Jackie, took both the drivers' and constructors' titles that season. Jackie and Ken were straightforward with each other, While this frequently led to arguments, it formed the core of a strong working relationship. Francois was soon taken under Jackie's wing and was a keen student. Being a small constructor, they were a close-knit group of people that tried to avoid the political aspects of F1, at least initially. But the family nature of the team would inspire them to greatness. 1972 was a season plagued by issues of a different kind. Jackie Stewart was overcommitted to different series the previous year. He'd flown over the Atlantic 186 times for races and media commitments. In 1972 it would catch up with him and he'd struggle through with exhaustion, culminating in him missing the Belgian Grand Prix because of a stomach ulcer. He'd finished second in the championship to Emerson Fittipaldi in the end. 1973, though, saw him back to his best, but struggling with the cost of the sport in terms of human life. He'd simply been to too many funerals and seen too many friends die. Partway through the year, he informed Ken that he'd be retiring at the end of that season. But that season, Jackie would win his third title and raise the total number of victories taken by a single driver in Formula One to 27, which, by the standards of today, doesn't sound a lot, but it was a different time then, where drivers' careers were much shorter, and events at the last race of the year highlighted the risks they took. Francois Sever would be the lead driver for the team going into 1974, and though he didn't know that, his growing confidence suggested he knew he was ready. Before pulling out of the pits to commence practice, he told Ken that he was going to put the car on pole in qualifying. Instead, he would suffer a devastating crash that killed him and made the team withdraw from the race, potentially costing them the Constructors' Championship that year. Francois was like a brother and son to Jackie and Ken, a free-spirited romantic whose loss was felt deeply, and Ken nearly withdrew from the sport. Instead, he regrouped and went in search of drivers. Having believed that Francois would lead the team in 1974, he'd been looking at a younger, more raw driver that they could shape into a reliably dependent driver who would one day fight for a title with them. That driver they'd been talking to was South African Jody Scheckter. But with Francois gone, he would instead find himself as the lead driver for the championship-winning team, with his teammate Patrick Depailler having even less experience. Ken's experience helped a little, and Jody would finish third in his first season for the team. But slowly the team slid down from the front, and it became clear that radical thinking was needed to be undertaken to get them back to the front of the grid. The unveiling of their car for 1976 would happen at a hotel near Heathrow. Journalists crowded round to watch the covers being taken off, unusually from the back first. When the P34 was revealed in all its mad glory, there was silence. The rear of the car was fairly conventional, but towards the front, instead of the standard front wheels, there were 4 smaller wheels. In the end, the 6-wheeled Tyrrell was a wonderfully brave failure that on its day was magnificent, and it took a 1-2 finish at the Swedish Grand Prix. According to Scheckter, the car was also fun to drive, but the team struggled to get on top of the complex creature they'd created, and they were partly undone by the cost of developing the smaller tyres used on the front of the car. No supplier was willing to pay the extra money to develop them for just one team to use. Still, it'd be far from the last time Tyrrell went radical to try and claw back performance from better equipped and funded teams. Following on from Jody's departure, long-time designer Derek Gardner also left the team, having trouble coping with the quite formidable Ken Tyrrell. For 1978 it was back to 4 wheels, and Jody's replacement Ronnie Peterson had also left to be replaced by Didier Pironi. Unfortunately for the team, Lotus had stolen march on the rest of the team with ground effect, and less sponsors on the car meant that Ken was keeping the cars on the track in no small part from his own pocket. Chasing expensive theoretical solutions was off the menu. As the team ticked into the 1980s, new sponsorship in the form of candy came and went, and turbo engines slowly made the Ford DSV that had helped make Tyrrell competitive obsolete. But Ken didn't like the turbo engines. They were expensive and prone to blowing up, and they felt they didn't give anything to the sport. Michele Alboreto would score the last win for the DSV engine and a last win for the Tyrrell team itself at the American Grand Prix in 1983. The 84 season started off with a reasonable amount of promise, despite the fact they were now the only team not running turbo engines. Their driver lineup of Martin Brundle and Stefan Beloff was exciting, and the chassis looked decent. Unfortunately, after scoring a podium in one race when the cars were taken to scrutineering, it was noted there were several irregularities with the Tyrrell. Firstly, the non-turbo engine had an additional water tank, which on initial check showed higher than normal levels of fuel, and therefore suggested that the fuel in the water was an additional fuel source. It was also discovered that there was loose ballast in the tank, and in previous years it had been suggested that Williams and Brabham had got round weight issues on their car with a trick system that allowed them to run underweight for portions of the race before adding ballast at the last stop so they would be legal and weighed afterwards. It was later shown that the fuel was actually less than 1% in the water tank and within legal parameters. The Tyrrell were banned from entering the remaining 3 races and then disqualified from the season. Ken felt it had been a ploy to get his team out of the way because as soon as they were ineligible to vote, the other teams brought in a list of changes that benefited the turbo engines. But perhaps as importantly, Tyrrell lost the prize money from that year and were fined by FISA for missing the rounds they were banned from, which all hurt the subsidies they were hoping for regarding travel costs for the following year as well. Again, they were also struggling with sponsorship for large parts of the period, and Ken was again putting his own money towards keeping the factory lights on. In 1989, for his 65th birthday, Ken had ended up driving one of the team trucks to Monaco because there weren't enough staff available. A glimmer of hope arrived in the form of Harvey Postlethwaite in 1987, and radical designs were again back on the drawing board. After the banning of ground effect, the team had tried boomerang rear wings in 1983. Now, for the Tyrrell 019 of 1990, they were introducing the high nose. The 019 is a brief high point that saw them achieve moderate success, with a couple of podiums, including a near win for John Alessi, battling against Ayrton Senna and Phoenix. With money to develop the cars being tight, Postlethwaite would be lured away again, but not long after, in 1993, he returned to the team in exchange for a 10% stake in the team. As the seasons went by, and the team fell to the back of the grid, facing questions about whether they'd be able to afford to be back the following year, Postlethwaite moved more into the management side, and design was placed in the hands of protégé Mike Gascoigne. In the last season, another radical idea would appear on the cars, which would briefly take them off the back row of the grid, but the X-Wings were soon copied by the other teams and banned on safety grounds. At the end of 1997, Ken eventually sold the team to British American Racing. Although the cars themselves and a large part of the equipment for them was sold to Paul Stoddard and used for the 2-seater F1 cars that have provided rides for fans and celebrities at F1 events over the years. Ken would die from cancer in 2001, but the team that he built is still the 8th most successful of all time, following on from Ferrari, McLaren, Williams, Mercedes, Lotus, Red Bull and Brabham. A tiny team, often punching above their weight, always on the hunt for a radical answer when they couldn't outdevelop or outspend their rivals, the team would take 3 drivers' titles, 1 constructors' title, 33 victories, 19 pole positions and 27 fastest laps in their 30-year history. And that was the team that Ken built. In 2009, when Ross Brawn bought the Honda team, he considered renaming it Tyrrell in reference to their past history, but eventually decided against it and named the team Brawn. The championship-winning Mercedes team can trace its roots to a little shed in a timber yard. Thank you all for watching.